I never thought 30 would feel like this. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, I imagined it would be this grand milestone, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Instead, I'm sitting in my small apartment in downtown Chicago, staring at my phone as the clock strikes midnight, marking the end of what should have been a celebration. My name is Emma Catherine Johnson, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most painful lessons come wrapped in silence, and how that silence eventually became the catalyst for discovering who I was truly meant to be. The morning of my 30th birthday started like any other Tuesday in mid-October. I woke up in my studio apartment on West Division Street, the familiar sounds of the city filtering through my thin walls. Traffic hummed below in its eternal rhythm, and I could hear Mrs. Chen from next door already bustling around her kitchen, the gentle clatter of dishes and the whistle of her tea kettle creating a domestic symphony I'd grown to love. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter, mixed with the urban perfume of coffee shops and bakeries preparing for the morning rush. I'd been living in this neighborhood for 3 years now, ever since I moved to Chicago for my job at a small marketing firm called Brightside Creative. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me the independence I'd always craved. The apartment was small but mine, filled with books I'd collected over the years, plants I somehow managed to keep alive despite my hectic schedule, and artwork I'd picked up from local artists at weekend markets. The walls were painted a soft sage green, and I'd arranged my furniture to maximize the natural light that streamed through the large windows facing east. This wasn't where I'd imagined I'd be at 30. Growing up, I'd harbored dreams of becoming a writer, maybe working for a magazine or publishing house. I'd majored in English literature at Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude, and had even started writing a novel during my senior year. But life had a way of redirecting dreams into practical necessities, and somehow I'd ended up in marketing, crafting compelling copy for other people's visions instead of pursuing my own. As I made my coffee in the small but efficient kitchen, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. 30 felt significant, like a real transition into adulthood. I'd been dropping hints to my family for weeks about wanting to celebrate, maybe go out for dinner or just spend time together. My sister Rachel lived just 40 minutes away in Naperville with her husband David and their 2 kids, 7-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Luke. My parents, Margaret and Robert Johnson, were retired now, living in the same house where Rachel and I had grown up in Oak Park, a charming suburb with tree-lined streets and the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business. My brother Michael worked downtown, not 15 minutes from my apartment, as a financial analyst at a firm that occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in the Loop. We had this family group chat called the Johnson Clan, where we shared everything from funny memes to important news. I'd mentioned my birthday plans there several times over the past month, talking about how I was looking forward to celebrating this milestone with everyone. The responses had been casual but positive. Rachel had sent a thumbs-up emoji and mentioned something about making sure to keep the weekend free. Dad had replied with, "Sounds good, kiddo." The same response he'd given me since I was 12. Mom had said something about making her famous chocolate cake, the one with the rich ganache frosting that had been my favorite since childhood. I checked my phone as I got ready for work, expecting maybe an early morning text or call. Nothing. But it was still early, I reasoned. Not everyone was up at 7 in the morning, especially not my family, who had never been early risers. I chose my outfit carefully that morning, a navy blue dress that I'd been saving for a special occasion, paired with the amber necklace my grandmother had given me before she passed away 5 years ago. Looking in the mirror, I felt good about myself. 30 looked confident, I decided. 30 looked like someone who had her life together, even if the reality was more complicated. The marketing firm where I worked was housed in a converted warehouse in River North, one of those trendy spaces with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and open floor plans that were supposed to inspire creativity. Brightside Creative specialized in campaigns for small to medium-sized businesses, from local restaurants to boutique clothing stores. It was the kind of place where people wore jeans to work and brought their dogs to the office, where the kitchen was always stocked with craft beer and kombucha, and where the line between work and social life was deliberately blurred. I'd been there for 2 years, working my way up from junior account coordinator to senior coordinator. It wasn't exactly where I'd dreamed of being at 30, but it was progress. My boss, Jennifer, was a former advertising executive who'd left the corporate world to start her own agency. She was demanding but fair, and she'd taken me under her wing in a way that made me feel valued professionally, even if I sometimes felt like I was just going through the motions, creatively. My colleagues were nice enough, though we weren't particularly close. Sarah Martinez from accounting had remembered my birthday was coming up and had mentioned maybe grabbing drinks after work. She was one of those people who seemed to genuinely care about everyone around her, remembering details about their lives and checking in when they seemed stressed. Tom Chen, one of the graphic designers, had made a joke about me joining the Dirty 30 Club, which had made me laugh despite the slightly awkward phrasing. These small acknowledgments felt warm, especially since these people saw me every day, but didn't owe me anything. Throughout the morning, I threw myself into work with unusual focus. I was managing a campaign for a local bookstore that was trying to compete with the chain stores, and I'd been developing a series of social media posts that highlighted the personal touch and community connection that only independent bookstores could provide. The work felt meaningful in a way that my usual corporate clients didn't, and I found myself genuinely excited about the creative possibilities. But even as I worked, I kept glancing at my phone. Surely someone from my family would reach out. A text, a call, even just a quick "happy birthday" in the group chat. But my phone remained stubbornly silent, showing only the usual notifications from work emails and app updates. During my lunch break, I decided to take a walk along the Chicago River. The city was alive around me in the way that only happens in October, when the summer heat has broken, but winter hasn't yet arrived. People were hurrying to meetings, their coats unbuttoned and scarves loose around their necks. Tourists snapped photos of the architecture, their faces bright with the wonder that comes from seeing something beautiful for the first time. Street vendors called out their offerings: hot dogs, pretzels, roasted nuts, their carts sending up streams of aromatic steam that mixed with the crisp air. I found a bench near the water and sat down, watching the boats drift by under the gray October sky. There was something about the river that had always calmed me. The way it moved with such purpose and persistence, carving its path through the city regardless of what surrounded it. I'd often come here when I needed to think, when the noise of my life became too much to process. As I sat there, I realized I was disappointed but not entirely surprised. My family had never been particularly demonstrative about celebrations. Birthdays were acknowledged but not necessarily celebrated with great fanfare. Christmas gifts were practical rather than thoughtful. Father's Day and Mother's Day were marked with obligatory cards and dinner reservations made at the last minute. But 30 felt different. This was supposed to be a milestone, a moment of recognition and celebration. I'd been so explicit about wanting to mark the occasion, so clear about its importance to me. How could they all just forget? I pulled out my phone and called my mom. "Hi, honey," she answered, her voice warm but distracted. I could hear the television in the background. Probably her afternoon talk show, the one where they discussed celebrity gossip and cooking tips with the kind of artificial enthusiasm that made everything seem slightly surreal. "Hi, Mom. How's your day going?" "Oh, just the usual." Your father's been working in the garage all morning, organizing his tools for the 3rd time this month. I swear that man treats that place like his personal kingdom. And Mrs. Patterson from down the street stopped by to complain about the leaves from our oak tree falling in her yard, as if I can control the wind. I listened to her familiar complaints about Dad's garage obsession and the neighbors' petty grievances, waiting for her to pause so I could steer the conversation. But she launched into a story about their neighbor's new dog and how it had been barking all week, disturbing her morning routine. "The thing is enormous," she continued. "Some kind of mastiff mix, and it has this deep bark that seems to echo through the whole neighborhood. I told your father we should say something, but you know how he is about confrontation." I made appropriate sounds of sympathy and interest, but my heart was sinking with each passing minute. She was talking to me like it was any other day, like there was nothing special about October 15th, like her youngest daughter hadn't just crossed a major life milestone. "Mom," I finally interrupted gently, "do you know what day it is?" "Tuesday, honey." "Why?" "Did I forget something at the grocery store? I was supposed to pick up milk for your father's coffee." The pause that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, searching for what she might be missing. The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sound of her television and the growing realization of what had happened. "Oh my God," she whispered, and I could hear the sharp intake of breath. "Emma, I'm so sorry. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I can't believe How could I forget? I'm such a terrible mother." "It's okay, Mom," I said quickly, though it wasn't. The words felt hollow, automatic, the kind of response I'd been trained to give since childhood to smooth over uncomfortable moments. "I was just checking in." "No, it's not okay. I don't know where my head is today. We should do something. Let me call your father and Rachel and we can all go out tonight. There's that new Italian place in Oak Park that everyone's been talking about, or we could go to that steakhouse you used to love when you were in college." The offer was genuine, I could tell, but it felt like a Band-Aid on a wound that needed stitches. A hastily arranged dinner born out of guilt wasn't what I'd wanted. I'd wanted to be remembered, to be thought of, to matter enough that someone would mark the date in their calendar and plan something special. "Mom, it's fine. Really. I have plans with friends tonight anyway." The lie came easily, a protective barrier against the disappointment that was threatening to overwhelm me. "Are you sure? I feel terrible. I should have remembered. I'm your mother, for God's sake." What kind of mother forgets her daughter's 30th birthday? I could hear her starting to cry, and I felt the familiar urge to comfort her, to make her feel better about hurting me. It was a dynamic we'd had for years. I would minimize my own needs to manage her emotions, to be the understanding daughter who never asked for too much. "I'm sure. I should get back to work." "Emma, wait. I love you so much. You know that, right? You're such a good daughter, so independent and capable. Sometimes I think we don't tell you enough how proud we are of you." "I know, Mom. I love you too. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I'm going to make this up to you. I promise." "Thanks, Mom. I'll talk to you soon." I hung up and sat there by the river, watching the water flow toward the lake. At least Mom had remembered once I prompted her. I told myself. That was something, right? But even as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't have had to remind my own mother that it was my birthday. I thought about calling Rachel or Michael, but something stopped me. If I had to prompt them too, if I had to manufacture my own birthday wishes, what was the point? Either they remembered or they didn't. Either I mattered enough to be on their radar, or I didn't. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. I threw myself back into work, updating client files and preparing presentations for the next day's meetings. My computer screen showed several birthday notifications from Facebook friends, acquaintances from college, former co-workers, people I barely spoke to anymore. Their well wishes felt hollow, automated responses to a social media prompt rather than genuine sentiment. Jessica from my sophomore year literature class. Happy birthday, Emma. Hope you have a wonderful day. Mark from my first job out of college. Another year older, another year wiser. Happy birthday. A dozen other messages in the same vein, each one a reminder that virtual strangers had been prompted to remember my birthday, while my own family had forgotten. But still nothing from the group chat. Nothing from Rachel. Nothing from Michael. Nothing from Dad. Around 3 o'clock, I found myself opening a new document and starting to write. Not marketing copy or client proposals, but something else entirely. Words began flowing out of me, a stream of consciousness about birthdays and family, and the strange way that expectations can become disappointments so quickly. There's something particularly cruel about a forgotten birthday, I wrote. It's not like forgetting to call back or missing a casual dinner invitation. A birthday is finite, irreplaceable. You can't reschedule being 30 for the first time. You can't make up for the absence of acknowledgement on the day itself. I stopped typing and stared at the screen. When was the last time I'd written something that felt this honest, this raw? In my marketing work, every word was calculated, designed to persuade and sell. But this was something different. This was truth, messy and painful and real. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah stopped by my desk with a small wrapped package. I know it's not much, she said, looking slightly embarrassed, but I saw this at the bookstore and thought of you. Inside was a beautiful journal with a leather cover, the kind I'd always admired but never bought for myself. The pages were thick and cream-colored, and there was a ribbon bookmark in deep blue silk. It was exactly the kind of gift that showed someone had been paying attention, had noticed what I liked and cared enough to act on it. Sarah, this is perfect. Thank you so much. I love it. I hope you have a wonderful birthday, Emma. You deserve it. As she walked away, I felt more appreciated by this colleague than by my own family. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman I'd known for 2 years had put more thought into my birthday than the people who had known me for 30. I ran my fingers over the leather cover of the journal, imagining filling it with the kind of writing I'd done earlier, the kind that felt real and necessary. Maybe this was what 30 was supposed to give me. Not just a celebration, but a catalyst for change. 6 o'clock came and went. I cleaned up my desk, said goodbye to the few people still in the office, and walked to the L station. The train was packed with commuters heading home to their families, their warm houses, their birthday celebrations, and Tuesday night dinners, and all the ordinary moments that make up a life. I found a seat near the window and watched the city blur past. Chicago in October was beautiful in a melancholy way, all amber light and long shadows. The trees were turning, their leaves creating a patchwork of gold and red against the gray sky. It was the kind of beauty that made you feel both grateful and lonely at the same time. I thought about the journal in my bag, about the words I'd written earlier, about the strange sense of possibility that had been building throughout the day. Maybe this forgotten birthday was trying to tell me something. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for other people to celebrate me and start celebrating myself. I stopped at the grocery store near my apartment and bought ingredients for pasta primavera, something I could make just for myself. As I wandered the aisles, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I didn't have to consider anyone else's preferences. Didn't have to worry about dietary restrictions or food allergies. I could buy exactly what I wanted, cook exactly what sounded good, eat exactly when I felt like it. In the produce section, I selected vegetables with unusual care. Bright red peppers, purple eggplant, yellow squash. colors that would look beautiful together, that would make my small apartment feel festive and alive. I bought flowers, too. A bouquet of white roses and eucalyptus that caught my eye near the checkout counter. As I waited in line, I watched a mother with her young daughter, maybe 6 or 7 years old, discussing plans for the girl's upcoming birthday party. The excitement in the child's voice was infectious. She wanted a princess theme, pink decorations, a cake shaped like a castle. The mother listened with patient attention to every detail, making notes on her phone, asking questions that showed she was taking the celebration seriously. "And can we have those special candles that relight themselves?" the little girl asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Of course, sweetheart. It's your special day." Watching them, I felt a pang of longing so sharp it took my breath away. Not for childhood, exactly, but for that sense of being the center of someone's universe, even if only for a day. When was the last time anyone had listened to me with that kind of focused attention? When was the last time someone had made me feel like my happiness was their priority? Back in my apartment, I arranged the flowers in a vase and set them on my small dining table. I cooked in relative silence, letting the familiar actions of chopping vegetables and stirring sauce ground me in the present moment. The pasta was perfectly al dente, the vegetables crisp and colorful. I set the table for one, lit candles I'd been saving for a special occasion, and poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been holding onto for months. If no one else was going to celebrate me, I decided, I'd celebrate myself. But sitting there alone, trying to make the meal feel festive, I couldn't shake the growing hurt. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Rachel and I had been close growing up, sharing secrets and dreams in the bedroom we'd shared until she left for college. We'd stay up late talking about boys and books and what we wanted to be when we grew up. We'd defended each other against playground bullies and stern teachers, had been each other's closest confidant through the awkward years of adolescence. Michael and I had our sibling rivalry, sure, but we'd always been there for each other when it mattered. When he'd broken his arm falling off his bike in 7th grade, I'd been the one to run 3 blocks to get help. When I'd been devastated by my first heartbreak in high school, he'd sat with me on the porch swing and shared his chocolate chip cookies without saying a word about my tears. My parents had raised me to believe that family came first, that we always showed up for each other when it mattered. They'd been at every school play, every graduation, every milestone moment of my life. They'd taught me that love was expressed through presence, through showing up, through making someone feel valued and seen. So where were they now? I kept checking my phone, hoping for a late text, a delayed reaction. Maybe they were planning a surprise. I thought desperately. Maybe they were all together right now, getting ready to show up at my door with cake and presents and explanations for why they'd been quiet all day. But 9 o'clock passed, then 10, then 11. No surprise, no explanation. Just the silence of a city beyond my windows and the echo of my own breathing in the small space. I took out the journal Sarah had given me and began to write by candlelight. Today I learned something about love that I didn't want to know. I wrote, I learned that you can care about someone much more than they care about you. I learned that you can be important to someone without being a priority. I learned that family isn't always the safe harbor you think it is. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as if a dam had burst somewhere inside me. I wrote about the birthday I'd imagined, the one with cake and laughter and people who were genuinely happy to celebrate another year of my life. I wrote about the birthday I'd actually had, with its careful politeness and hollow gestures, and the growing realization that I was more alone than I'd ever admitted to myself. I wrote about the pattern I was beginning to see, how I was always the one to call, the one to make plans, the one to remember important dates and send thoughtful gifts, how I'd been so focused on being the good daughter, the reliable sister, the family member who never caused trouble, that I'd forgotten to ask for anything in return. At midnight, I finally accepted the truth. They had forgotten. All of them. My 30th birthday had come and gone without a single acknowledgement from the people who mattered most to me. I sat in my bed, still dressed, staring at the group chat that had been active just 2 days ago, with messages about Michael's new job promotion and Rachel's daughter's soccer game. The thread was there, our family's digital lifeline. But it had gone completely silent when it came to me. I scrolled back through months of messages, looking for patterns. How often did I initiate conversations? How often did I ask about their lives versus how often they asked about mine? How often did I offer help, support, encouragement, versus how often they offered the same to me? The results were stark and painful. In the past 3 months, I'd sent 47 messages to the group chat. I'd received 12 responses that were more than just emoji reactions. I'd asked about Rachel's kids, Michael's work, my parents' health, their plans, their problems, their successes. They'd asked about my life exactly twice, and both times it had been cursory. How's work? Followed by quick topic changes when I tried to give detailed answers. I was the family cruise director. I realized. The one who kept everyone connected and informed and engaged. But what happened when the cruise director needed something? Apparently, nothing. The next few days passed in a blur of wounded numbness. I went to work, came home, made dinner, went to bed. I didn't reach out to anyone in my family, partly out of hurt and partly out of a morbid curiosity about how long it would take for someone to realize what had happened. Rachel posted photos on Instagram of her kids' Halloween costumes. Sophie as a fairy princess, Luke as a superhero. The pictures were adorable, and normally I would have been the first to comment, to ask about their trick-or-treating plans, to offer to help with party preparations. Instead, I scrolled past without engaging. Michael shared an article about his company's latest product launch on LinkedIn, the kind of professional milestone that usually prompted a congratulatory text from me. I read it, felt genuinely proud of his success, and then did nothing. Mom commented on a friend's post about their grandchildren, gushing about how precious they were and how much she missed having little ones around. The irony struck me. She was more engaged with strangers' grandchildren than she was with her own daughter's life. Life went on for everyone else as if nothing had happened. The world didn't stop because Emma Johnson had been forgotten. The group chat remained active with updates about weekend plans and funny videos, and the ordinary chatter of people who stayed in touch. I found myself analyzing every interaction we'd had leading up to my birthday, looking for signs that I'd somehow misunderstood the nature of our relationships. Had I been too needy? Too demanding? Was I not as important to them as they were to me? The rational part of my mind knew that people forget things, that life gets busy, that one missed birthday didn't erase 30 years of family history. But the emotional part of me felt like a child who'd been left behind, invisible, and forgotten. I began to notice things I'd overlooked before. How conversations always seemed to revolve around other people's news, other people's problems, other people's achievements. How I'd become the family's emotional support system, the one everyone called when they needed to vent or celebrate or process something difficult. But when was the last time someone had called to ask how I was doing, just because they cared? I thought about the last time I'd seen them all together, at Rachel's daughter's birthday party 2 months ago. I'd driven 40 minutes to Naperville, brought a thoughtful gift I'd spent weeks selecting, helped set up decorations, cleaned up afterward. I'd been fully present, engaged, helpful. But as I thought about it now, I realized that most of my interactions that day had been functional, helping with party logistics, managing cranky children, cleaning up spills. When had anyone asked about my life, my work, my dreams? Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects with renewed focus, staying late to perfect presentations and volunteering for assignments that would keep my mind occupied. The bookstore campaign was going particularly well. My social media posts were generating real engagement, and the client was seeing increased foot traffic. There was something satisfying about creating something that worked, that made a tangible difference in the world. Sarah noticed the change in my energy and mentioned it one afternoon as we were both working late. "You've been really driven lately," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a cup of tea. "Everything okay? Just feeling motivated," I replied, not looking up from my computer screen where I was crafting copy for a new campaign. "Emma," her voice was gentle but insistent. "What's going on? You've been here until 8 o'clock every night this week." I finally met her eyes, and something in her expression, genuine concern, real attention, made my carefully constructed composure crack. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. About the forgotten birthday, about the silence, about the growing realization that maybe I wasn't as central to my family's life as I'd believed. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions or making sympathetic sounds. She didn't try to fix anything or offer empty platitudes. She just listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel seen and heard. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "That's incredibly hurtful," she said. "I can't imagine how disappointed you must be." "I keep telling myself it's not that big a deal," I said. "People forget things. Life gets busy. I'm probably being too sensitive. But birthdays aren't just things, Emma. Especially milestone birthdays. And it wasn't just one person forgetting. It was all of them. That's not forgetfulness. That's a pattern." Her words hit me like a physical blow, because they named what I'd been afraid to admit to myself. This wasn't an innocent oversight. This was a pattern of taking me for granted, of assuming I'd always be there, regardless of how I was treated. "What should I do?" I asked. "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "But I know you deserve better than this. You deserve people who show up for you, who remember what's important to you, who make you feel valued. You're one of the most thoughtful, caring people I know. The way you remember everyone's coffee orders, the way you check in when someone's having a rough day, the way you really listen when people talk. That's not common, Emma. That's special, and you deserve that same energy back." That night I sat in my apartment and really looked at my life. I'd been so focused on maintaining relationships with people who clearly didn't prioritize me that I'd neglected to build connections with people who might. I'd turned down invitations from coworkers, declined opportunities to join clubs or activities, all because I was always available for family events that I now realized I was rarely specifically invited to. I just assumed I was welcome. I thought about the friends I'd lost touch with after college, the opportunities I'd passed up because I was committed to being the good daughter and reliable sister. I thought about the birthday parties I'd attended, the Christmas gifts I'd carefully selected, the phone calls I'd made just to check in. Had any of it been reciprocated with the same intention and care? The answer was painful but clear. No. I opened my laptop and started writing, the words flowing onto the screen, with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. "There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being the one who always remembers," I wrote. "The one who sends the birthday texts and holiday cards, who asks about the job interview and the doctor's appointment, who shows up with soup when someone's sick and champagne when someone's celebrating. It's the exhaustion of being the family's emotional infrastructure, invisible, until something breaks." I wrote about the birthday that had revealed the truth about my relationships, about the silence that had spoken louder than any words. I wrote about the realization that I'd been performing love rather than receiving it, giving my energy to people who couldn't be bothered to give it back. The words came for hours, pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. I wrote about the little girl who'd wanted nothing more than to be seen and valued, and the woman who'd spent 30 years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I wrote about the moment I'd realized that I was more important to my family as a function than as a person, the one who remembered things, who organized gatherings, who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone connected. As I wrote, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was transforming into something else, a kind of clarity, a recognition of my own worth that didn't depend on other people's acknowledgement. I was valuable. I was thoughtful and caring and intelligent. I had gifts to offer the world that had nothing to do with my family's ability to recognize them. I had been waiting for them to see me, but maybe it was time to stop waiting and start living. Over the following weeks, I began to make small changes. I accepted Sarah's invitation to join her book club, a group of women who met monthly at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. I started going to the gym in my building, not because I needed to lose weight, but because moving my body felt like a form of self-care. Each new activity brought new people into my life, people who didn't know me as the responsible daughter or the reliable sister who saw me as Emma, a person with her own interests and opinions and dreams. The book club women were passionate readers who engaged in heated debates about character motivation and literary themes. The pottery class was full of people like me, beginners who laughed at their lopsided bowls and celebrated small victories. I found myself looking forward to these activities in a way I hadn't looked forward to anything in years. There was something liberating about being around people who had no expectations of me. Beyond showing up and being present, I didn't have to manage anyone's emotions or remember anyone's schedule or smooth over family dynamics. At work, I began to speak up more in meetings, to share ideas that had been percolating in my mind, but that I'd been too cautious to voice. Jennifer noticed the change and started giving me more creative control over campaigns. The bookstore project had been such a success that she assigned me to lead the pitch for a new client, a local arts organization that needed help promoting their upcoming season. "You have a gift for storytelling," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed my presentation materials. "You don't just sell products, you sell dreams, possibilities, connections. That's rare in this business." Her words sparked something in me, a recognition of abilities I'd been undervaluing. I'd always been good at writing, at understanding what motivated people, at crafting messages that resonated. But I'd thought of these as soft skills, less valuable than the technical expertise of my colleagues. Now I was beginning to see them as strengths, as the foundation for a career that could be more fulfilling than I'd imagined. I started working on my own writing in the evenings, using the journal Sarah had given me to explore ideas and emotions I'd been afraid to examine. Some of it was about my family, about the dynamics that had shaped me, and the ways I was learning to break free from them. But more and more, I found myself writing about other things, about the city I lived in, about the people I met, about the small moments of beauty and connection that made up a life. 3 weeks after my birthday, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Not the self I'd been before, but a new version. Someone who was learning to value her own opinion, to trust her own instincts, to believe that she deserved better than she'd been accepting. I was making dinner on a Thursday evening, listening to a podcast about sustainable living while preparing a stir-fry with vegetables from the farmer's market I'd started visiting on weekends. The apartment felt different now, more like a home than a place where I happened to sleep. I'd rearranged the furniture to create a small writing nook by the window, had hung some of my pottery class creations on the wall, had filled the space with plants and books and the detritus of a life being actively lived. When my phone buzzed with a text, I assumed it was Sarah confirming our plans for the weekend or someone from book club sharing an article. I was completely unprepared for what I saw on the screen. It was from Rachel, the first communication I'd received from anyone in my family since that awkward conversation with Mom 3 weeks ago. "Hey, can you help with Dad's birthday? We're collecting $2,000. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $2,000 for Dad's birthday. From the sister who hadn't even managed to send me a happy birthday text 3 weeks ago. I set down my knife and leaned against the kitchen counter, my hands shaking slightly. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Not, "Hi, how are you?" or "Sorry we missed your birthday," or even, "Hope you're doing well." Just a demand for money, casual and expectant, as if I was some kind of ATM that dispensed cash on request. My phone buzzed again. "We're trying to get him that new fishing boat he's been wanting. Michael and I are splitting the cost, but we could use help. Can you do $500? $500. More than I spent on groceries in 2 months. More than I'd ever spent on any single gift in my life. For a man who couldn't be bothered to remember that his daughter had turned 30. I walked to my living room window and looked out at the city lights, trying to process what I was feeling. It wasn't just anger, though. That was certainly part of it. It was a deep, bone-deep exhaustion with the entire dynamic. The assumption that I would always be available, always willing to contribute, always ready to prioritize their needs over my own feelings. I thought about Dad, about the last time we'd had a real conversation. It had been months ago, maybe longer. He'd called to ask if I could help him set up his new tablet, and I'd spent an hour on the phone walking him through the process, explaining how to download apps and organize his home screen. Before that, it had been something about his computer acting up. A virus he'd somehow downloaded that I'd helped him remove. Before that, a question about his taxes that I'd spent my evening researching and answering. When was the last time he'd called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time he'd shown genuine interest in my life, my work, my dreams? When was the last time he'd asked about my happiness, my health, my hopes for the future? I couldn't remember. The pattern was becoming clearer with each passing moment. I was useful to them, as a tech support hotline, as a reliable contributor to family expenses, as the one who could be counted on to show up when needed. But was I valued? Was I loved in a way that showed itself through actions rather than just words? The evidence suggested otherwise. My phone was still in my hand, Rachel's messages glowing on the screen. I started to type a response several times, then deleted it. What was there to say? "Sorry, I can't afford it. Maybe next time remember my birthday first." How dare you ask me for money when you couldn't even remember the most basic acknowledgement of my existence? None of those responses felt right. They were too emotional, too reactive. They gave away too much of my pain and, more importantly, they opened the door for explanations and excuses and the kind of circular conversation that would leave me feeling even worse. I could already imagine Rachel's response. "Oh my God, Emma, I'm so sorry about your birthday. Things have been crazy with the kids and work, and David's been traveling so much. You know how it is. But about Dad's gift, he's been talking about this boat for months, and we really want to surprise him. You know how much fishing means to him, especially since he retired. It would mean so much if you could help." The familiar pattern of deflection and emotional manipulation, making me feel guilty for even bringing up my hurt, redirecting the conversation back to their needs and expectations. I'd fallen for it 1,000 times before, prioritizing their comfort over my own well-being. But something had shifted in me over the past 3 weeks. The writing I'd been doing, the new people I'd been meeting, the small acts of self-care I'd been practicing. They'd all contributed to a growing sense of my own worth that didn't depend on other people's approval. I sat on my couch, still staring at the phone, and realized that this was a moment of choice. I could respond as I always had, accommodating, understanding, putting their needs before my own feelings. I could send some version of, "I'm sorry. I can't help with that right now," and let the issue fade into the background like so many other small hurts and disappointments. Or I could do something different, something that honored the truth of what I'd learned about myself and my relationships. Something that said, "You don't get to treat me as disposable and then expect me to be available when you need something." I opened my banking app and navigated to the transfer section. Rachel had included Dad's account information in her message, clearly expecting a quick and easy transaction. The casual assumption that I would comply, that I would contribute without question, was almost more insulting than the forgotten birthday itself. I typed in the account number, then moved to the amount field. $2,000 appeared automatically, the suggested amount based on Rachel's message. I deleted it and typed in a different number. $2. The price of a greeting card, less than a cup of coffee. A number so small it was almost insulting, which was exactly the point. In the memo field I wrote, "This is what my birthday felt like." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the send button. This was it. The moment where I stopped being the accommodating daughter, the reliable sister, the family member who absorbed hurt and disappointment without complaint. This was the moment where I chose my own dignity over their comfort. I hit send. The transaction went through immediately. $2, transferred from my account to my father's, with a message that said everything I couldn't find the words to express. It was petty maybe, but it was also honest. It was a mirror held up to their behavior, reflecting back the same level of consideration they'd shown me. But I wasn't done. I went to my contacts and found Michael's number. My finger hovered over his name for a moment, remembering the brother who'd shared his Halloween candy with me, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd been my partner in countless childhood adventures. Then I thought about the man who couldn't be bothered to remember my 30th birthday, but expected me to contribute to expensive gifts for other people. Blocked. Then Rachel's number. My sister, my former confidant, the person who'd known me longer than anyone else in the world, the woman who'd asked for $500 like it was pocket change, who'd assumed I would comply without question, who'd shown me exactly where I ranked in her priorities. Blocked. Then my parents' numbers. Mom, who'd forgotten, until I reminded her, who'd cried about being a terrible mother, but hadn't bothered to follow up with any meaningful gesture. Dad, who'd received my money and my message, but hadn't responded, who'd probably dismiss it as Emma being dramatic again. Blocked. I opened the family group chat and stared at the thread that had connected us for years. All those messages, all those updates, all those moments of shared information and casual connection. I scrolled back through months of conversations, seeing them now with new eyes. The pattern was undeniable. I gave. They took. I remembered. They forgot. I showed up. They assumed I always would. I left the group chat and then blocked those numbers too. Just to be sure. On Facebook, I unfriended all of them. The process felt ceremonial, each click a small act of liberation. No more seeing their updates, no more being reminded of family events I wasn't really invited to. No more watching their lives continue as if I didn't exist. On Instagram, I blocked their accounts. No more seeing Rachel's perfectly curated photos of her family. No more watching Michael's professional achievements from the sidelines. No more being a passive observer in the lives of people who'd made it clear I was peripheral to their happiness. I went through my social media methodically, removing every connection that tied me to people who had made it clear that I was not a priority in their lives. It took about 20 minutes to completely sever all digital ties with my family. 20 minutes to undo 30 years of assumed connection. When I was finished, I felt oddly light, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there. The silence in my apartment felt different now. Not empty, but peaceful. Not lonely, but free. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was just done. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. There was no anxious checking of my phone for messages. No wondering if I should reach out to anyone. No guilt about not being available for whatever crisis or need might arise. Just the quiet satisfaction of having chosen myself. Finally, and completely. I woke up the next morning feeling clear-headed and purposeful, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The first thing I did was check my phone, not for family messages, but for the daily weather forecast. It was going to be a beautiful day, crisp and clear, perfect for the long walk I'd been planning to take along the lakefront. At work, Sarah noticed the change immediately. "You look different," she said, studying my face as I settled at my desk with my coffee. "Good different. What happened?" I told her about Rachel's text, about the money transfer, about the blocking. I expected her to be shocked, maybe even disapproving. Instead, she smiled. Not a small, polite smile, but a wide grin that transformed her entire face. "Good for you," she said. "That was perfect." "Really? You don't think it was too harsh?" "Emma, they forgot your 30th birthday, and then asked you for $500 3 weeks later. If anything, $2 was generous." Her validation felt like a warm embrace. Here was someone who saw the situation clearly, who understood that I wasn't being dramatic or oversensitive, who recognized that what had happened was genuinely wrong. "I keep waiting to feel guilty," I admitted, "like I've done something terrible by cutting them off." "You haven't," Sarah said firmly. "You've set a boundary. You've said that you won't accept being treated as disposable. That's not cruel. That's healthy." Over the following days, I began to understand what I'd actually done. I hadn't just blocked their numbers. I'd reclaimed my own worth. I'd drawn a line that said, "You don't get to treat me as an afterthought and then expect me to be available when you need something." It was frightening, being so deliberately alone, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate my worth or include me in their plans. I was free to build the life I actually wanted, not the life I thought I was supposed to want. I started small. I accepted more invitations from coworkers, discovering that my colleagues were actually interesting people with rich inner lives. Jennifer from my team was a weekend rock climber, who regaled us with stories of her adventures in the mountains. Tom was working on a graphic novel in his spare time, and his passion for storytelling was infectious. Even quiet Marcus from IT turned out to be a jazz musician who played at small clubs around the city. I joined a hiking group that met on weekends, finding myself drawn to the physical challenge and the easy camaraderie of people who shared a common interest. There was something profoundly satisfying about pushing my body up a challenging trail, about earning the view from the top through effort and determination. The group was welcoming and unpretentious, full of people who measured success by personal achievement rather than external validation. I bought myself a birthday gift, 3 months late, but no less meaningful for the delay. It was the expensive art supplies I'd been wanting for years but never justified purchasing. Professional-grade watercolors, high-quality brushes, thick paper that could handle multiple layers of paint. I set up a small studio space in the corner of my apartment, near the window where the light was best, and began painting again for the first time since college. The act of creating something beautiful, something that existed purely because I wanted it to exist, felt revolutionary. I painted the city skyline at sunset, the lake in winter, the faces of strangers I observed on the train. Each painting was a small declaration of independence, a reminder that I had value beyond my utility to other people. The book club became a monthly highlight, a gathering of women who challenged each other intellectually and supported each other emotionally. We read everything from contemporary fiction to historical biographies, and our discussions were passionate and thoughtful. These women didn't know me as the daughter who'd been forgotten or the sister who'd been taken for granted. They knew me as Emma, someone with insights and opinions worth hearing. At work, I began to advocate for myself with the same energy I'd once used to manage everyone else's needs. When Jennifer mentioned that the company was looking for someone to lead a new initiative focused on storytelling and marketing, I didn't wait to be asked. I requested a meeting and made my case. The project was mine within a week, along with a significant raise and a new title, Senior Creative Strategist. The work was challenging and fulfilling in ways I'd never experienced before. I was developing campaigns that told real stories, that connected with people on an emotional level, that made a tangible difference in how businesses communicated with their customers. It was the kind of work that used all of my skills, my writing ability, my understanding of human psychology, my talent for seeing patterns and connections. Weeks turned into months. I got promoted again, this time to creative director, with my own team and a budget to match my ambitions. I moved to a bigger apartment with better light and space for my art, a place that felt like a real home rather than just somewhere to sleep. The new apartment had a small balcony where I could grow herbs and flowers, and a second bedroom that I turned into a proper studio. I adopted a cat from the shelter down the street, a gray tabby named Sage, who seemed to understand that we were both starting over. He was an older cat, overlooked by most potential adopters in favor of younger, more energetic animals. But there was something in his calm, steady presence that spoke to me. We were both learning to trust again, to build a life that didn't depend on other people's approval. I wondered sometimes if my family had tried to contact me, if they'd received my message and understood what it meant. But I'd made sure there was no way for them to reach me, and I found that I didn't actually want to know. The silence I'd imposed was different from the silence they'd given me. It was chosen, protective, powerful. I imagined them trying to figure out what had happened, why I'd suddenly disappeared from their lives. Maybe they'd chalked it up to Emma being dramatic again, sensitive about some perceived slight. Maybe they'd assumed I was going through a difficult time and would eventually reach out when I was ready. Maybe they'd simply moved on, found other people to fill the functional role I'd played in their lives. The truth was, I didn't care anymore. Their reaction to my absence said more about them than it did about me. If they'd valued me, they would have fought for the relationship. If they'd loved me the way I'd loved them, they would have done the work to understand what had gone wrong. Sarah became not just a colleague, but a real friend, the kind who remembered important dates and checked in when I was having a tough day. She was the first person I called when I got my promotion, the first to hear about my new apartment, the first to meet Sage, and declare him the most distinguished cat she'd ever encountered. The hiking group welcomed me into their circle with an enthusiasm that still surprised me. These people showed up consistently, rain or shine, for weekend adventures that ranged from easy walks to challenging climbs. They celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through difficulties. When one member was going through a divorce, the group rallied around her with practical help and emotional support. When another achieved a personal goal of hiking all the trails in a nearby state park, we threw a celebration that felt genuinely joyful. I learned that I was capable of being alone without being lonely, that I could create a life that felt full and meaningful, without depending on people who didn't appreciate me. I learned that love, real love, doesn't take you for granted, doesn't assume you'll always be available, doesn't forget what matters to you. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who don't love you back, even when those people are family. Especially when those people are family. The writing I'd started in that journal Sarah gave me evolved into something more substantial. I began working on a memoir about family dynamics, about the ways we learn to accept less than we deserve, about the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to choose them. The writing felt urgent and necessary, a way to process my experience and perhaps help others who'd found themselves in similar situations. I submitted some excerpts to literary magazines and was surprised when several were accepted for publication. The response from readers was overwhelming. Dozens of emails from people who'd recognized their own experiences in my words, who'd found the courage to examine their own relationships and make difficult choices about what they would and wouldn't accept. One email in particular stayed with me. It was from a woman in her 50s who'd spent decades being the family peacemaker, the one who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction and tried to hold everything together. She'd read my piece about forgotten birthdays and said it had given her the permission she'd been looking for to stop trying to fix relationships that were fundamentally broken. "I'm 62 years old," she wrote, "and I'm finally learning that I don't owe anyone my happiness. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose yourself." The memoir became a book, and the book became a modest success. Not a bestseller, but something that reached the people who needed it most. I did readings at bookstores and libraries, speaking to audiences full of people who'd struggled with similar family dynamics. The conversations that followed were profound and healing, a reminder that telling our stories can be a form of service. On my 31st birthday, I woke up to texts from Sarah, from my hiking friends, from my coworkers. I had plans for dinner with people who had marked the date in their calendars weeks in advance, who'd asked what I wanted to do, and listened to my answer with genuine interest. I had a life that felt genuinely celebratory, filled with people who saw me and valued me. I thought briefly about my family, wondering if they remembered this year, if they'd learned anything from my silence. But the thought passed quickly, replaced by excitement about the evening ahead and gratitude for the people who had proven that I was worth showing up for. I'd learned the hard way that you can't force people to value you, but you can refuse to accept being undervalued. Sometimes the most powerful word in the English language is no. No to being taken for granted. No to being forgotten. No to accepting less than you deserve. $2 had bought me something priceless, my own self-respect. And that was worth more than any fishing boat, any family obligation, any relationship built on one-sided effort. I was finally, truly, celebrating myself. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the watercolors I'd been working on. My apartment was filled with the scent of the dinner I was preparing for friends who would actually show up, who'd remembered what mattered to me, who understood that showing up is the most basic form of love. Sage was curled up on his favorite chair, purring contentedly. My easel held a half-finished painting of the lake in winter, capturing the way the light hit the water during those brief, brilliant moments just before sunset. My bookshelf held the published memoir, with its dedication. To everyone who's ever had to choose between being loved and being valued. You deserve both. This was what happiness looked like. Chosen family, creative fulfillment, financial stability, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. It had taken 31 years to get here, but I'd finally arrived. The old Emma would have been checking her phone, wondering if this would be the year her family remembered. The new Emma was too busy living her life to care about people who had proven they weren't really living in it. I raised my glass of wine to the empty room, to the cat who'd become my companion, to the city that had sheltered me through my transformation. "Happy birthday to me," I said out loud, and meant it completely. The doorbell rang and I smiled, knowing that on the other side of that door were people who had chosen to be here, who had remembered what mattered to me, who understood that showing up is the most basic form of love. People who had seen my worth and decided it was worth their time, their energy, their presence. I opened the door to my real family, the one I'd built myself, person by person, relationship by relationship, choice by choice. Sarah was there with a bottle of champagne and a huge smile. Behind her were Tom and Jennifer from work, Marcus with his guitar for the impromptu concert we'd planned, and several members of my hiking group with stories from their latest adventure. "Happy birthday, Emma," they chorused, and their voices filled my apartment with warmth and genuine celebration. As they filed in, each bringing their own energy and enthusiasm, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude. These people had chosen to be here. They'd planned ahead, brought gifts, cleared their schedules, shown up with full hearts, and genuine excitement about celebrating another year of my life. This was what love looked like when it was real, when it was reciprocal, when it was based on mutual respect and genuine care. This was what I'd been missing all those years when I'd been trying to earn affection from people who saw me as a convenience rather than a person. The evening unfolded with the kind of natural joy that can't be manufactured or forced. We cooked together, laughed together, shared stories and dreams and the easy intimacy of people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Marcus played guitar while we sang along, our voices blending in imperfect harmony. Sarah had brought a cake she'd made herself. Chocolate with the ganache frosting she'd somehow remembered was my favorite. As the night wore on and the conversation deepened, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The forgotten birthday that had felt like an ending was actually a beginning. The start of a life built on different principles, different values, different understanding of what love actually meant. I thought about the $2 I'd sent to my father, the message that had said everything I couldn't put into words. It had been a small act of rebellion, but it had opened the door to a much larger transformation. It had been my first step toward valuing myself the way I'd always valued others. The party continued into the night, with people trickling out slowly, each leaving with hugs and promises to get together soon. Sarah was the last to leave, helping me clean up the dishes and wrap up the leftover cake. "This was perfect," she said, settling onto my couch with a cup of tea. "You looked so happy tonight." "I was," I said, and realized it was completely true. "I am. You know what I love most about watching you this past year?" she asked. "You've become yourself. Not the person you thought you were supposed to be, but the person you actually are. It's beautiful to see." Her words hit me with unexpected force. She was right. I had become myself. Not the accommodating daughter or the reliable sister, but Emma. A person with her own thoughts and dreams and boundaries. A person who deserved to be celebrated, who had learned to celebrate herself. After Sarah left, I stood in my apartment surrounded by the detritus of a genuine celebration. Empty wine glasses, crumpled wrapping paper, the lingering scent of birthday cake. Evidence of a life being actively lived, of relationships based on mutual joy rather than obligation. I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app, wanting to capture the feeling of this moment before it faded. "On my 31st birthday," I typed, "I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choice. It's about showing up. It's about seeing someone's worth and deciding to honor it with your presence." I paused, thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago, desperately waiting for acknowledgement from people who'd already shown me where I ranked in their priorities. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I remembered with compassion but no longer recognized as myself. The best gift I've ever received was the gift of my own absence from relationships that didn't serve me. I continued typing. The silence that felt like rejection was actually protection. The family that forgot me gave me the space to find the family that would never forget me. I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built from scratch, at the evidence of connections that were real and reciprocal and nourishing. Sage was sleeping peacefully in his chair, completely secure in his place in this small world we'd created together. My easel held tomorrow's creative possibility. My bookshelf held the story I'd been brave enough to tell. This was what 31 looked like. Chosen family, creative fulfillment, financial independence, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. It had taken a forgotten birthday to teach me that I was worth remembering. It had taken being rejected to learn that I was worth choosing. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, feeling the deep satisfaction of a day well lived, of a year well built, of a life finally, truly my own. The last thing I did before falling asleep was check my calendar for the next day. Brunch with the book club, a hike in the afternoon, dinner with a new friend I'd met at a writing workshop. A life full of people who'd chosen to be in it, who showed up consistently, who understood that love is a verb, not just a feeling. I smiled in the darkness, thinking about how far I'd come from the woman who'd sat alone on her 30th birthday, wondering why she wasn't worth remembering. I'd learned that the answer wasn't that I wasn't worth remembering. It was that I'd been asking the wrong people to remember me. Now I was surrounded by people who didn't need to be asked, who remembered because they cared, who showed up because they wanted to, who celebrated me because they saw me as worth celebrating. And I never looked back. In the distance, the city hummed with its endless energy, full of people building lives and relationships and dreams. I was part of that energy now, no longer waiting on the sidelines for someone else to validate my existence. I was writing my own story, painting my own pictures, building my own family, one conscious choice at a time. The chapter of my life that had been defined by trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it was finally, completely closed. And the new chapter, the one where I was the author of my own worth, where I surrounded myself with people who showed up, who remembered, who cared, was still being written. It was the best story I'd ever told.